How's everybody today?
Pretty good. Thanks for asking.
All right. So who we got? Who's here? All right. Do you want to start, Ryan?
Oh, yeah. My name's Ryan. What did you want to know? Sorry, I missed the first part.
Well, what would be interesting? I guess well, obviously I'd love to know what your questions are, but maybe a little bit about what you're doing around composting and what you're interested in, why you're here tonight.
Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm actually interested mostly in organic lawn care, but I know this is covering composting. So from my personal experience, I have a compost bin in my yard. But eventually that would be something that I'd want to offer to my customers going forward. But specifically, I'm looking to have an organic lawn care business. So I don't really have any specific questions right now that around composting, but that's why I'm here, and that's what I'm looking to do.
Right, cool.
Yeah.
Selling compost and organic land care. Okay.
Yeah.
Lawn care in particular. Compost is really good for lawns.
Yes.
Aerating it, and then compost is one of the best uses of compost, and for lawns, yeah, especially. All right, thanks for joining us. Anyone else?
I don't really have any specific things to say about where I am with compost right now. I've tried it a few times, ended up moving both times and had to stop. Right now we're building a house, and so our yard is going to be extremely compacted. There's a lot of clay. In lieu of compost, would it be good to go and get topsoil from elsewhere on the acreage to start the compost tea with?
Having soil from the indigenous area, yes, because then you'll introduce and bring in and multiply the local microbes that are active. And especially if you go into the old growth forest, you'll get more fungal there. So it's always nice to introduce more fungal when you're starting growing, because the minute you disturb the soil, it's going to be bacterial dominant. And so having that local fungi as a microbe that you're bringing in is awesome. Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Okay.
So I've done that before, taken soil that was high fungal, checked it under the microscope, and then used that combined with worm castings, because the numbers of the diversity of microbes in something like worm castings is really extreme. So combining the local soil with worm castings is really a nice combination.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Anyone else want to introduce themselves?
What do you think of these different products you can buy where you're adding mycorrhizal fungi to the soil? I mean, there's so many different products, and I don't know if I trust them or not.
I've tried them. I've seen no results.
Okay.
I looked at them under the microscope, and I think, I don't know, is that really a fungi? It's like white and straight, like little sticks. And I don't know if it's the fungi I need. It's certainly not from around here. So I don't want to say, and again, you can buy compost tea bags. For me, it's just like the food I eat. I don't want to buy canned food or freeze-dried food. I want to have the freshest and the most local possible, because I think that's the healthiest. And I think that would be my same approach to any type of inputs. So if we are going down this route and we're going regenerative and we want to bring the soil back to life, well, let's bring some life in there from the local healthy environment that's around us. So I guess, no, I wouldn't do that.
Okay. Do you have any advice on evaluating compost products that other people are making? Like there's some local suppliers here of compost and compost tea, but again, I don't really know what their training is and whether or not what they're selling is worth it.
I know.
So like
Very
without getting a microscope, And that's another question I have, like what microscope, do you have any recommendations on microscopes for evaluating compost and compost tea?
Yeah, so the one I use, it's now on sale for $300. I can try, if you give me a minute, I'll be able to put the link in the chat. I just buy it on Amazon, and in fact, one just arrived because we're offering that to, anyway, for the winter conference, and then training involved. So microscopes, I find with compost tea, you just take a drop and look at it. With worm compost or any type of composting, you would dilute it, shake it up, and then look at a drop under the microscope and see what kind of life. But there are things you can look at when you are studying soil if you don't have a microscope.
Right.
One of the simplest tests you can do is put a little bit in a glass and slowly pour water. If there's any cloudiness, what you want to see is the darker cocoa color. That means there's humic acid in that compost. When you touch it, you don't want it to fall apart. You want it to be the right moisture. So if it's dried out, then guess what? The microbes have dried out. So you want to make sure that it hasn't totally gone to dust. And you want to make sure that there's aggregates in there so that you touch it, it'll crumble, but you can still feel there's texture to it. If it's more of a tan color when you add the water, it means there's probably clay. There might be some fulvic acid in there. But and you don't want it to pour in the water and it stays clear, because that tells me that it doesn't have any porosity.
Okay.
It's not porous at all. You can't take in any water.
So ideally it would get cloudy and you would see dark, like the color of chocolate.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And then if you give it a little shake, so a test tube's the easiest, of course, but if you just put it in a little jar and shake it, how long does it take to settle? So if it separates right away, it means that there's no water being absorbed by the compost.
Okay.
Are there big chunks of wood chips in there? That means that those are going to continue to decompose, which is great, except they're also going to be using the nitrogen that's in that compost to do that decomposition. And those are really big chunks for microbes to get their teeth around. They don't have any. And microbes, as worms as well, are eating decomposing materials. So they want to have materials that are already in the process of decomposing.
Okay.
Okay, that give you some idea.
So with the microscope, you'll give us that information later?
Right.
Okay.
In fact, if you talk amongst yourselves, does someone else want to introduce themselves while I look that up? Jillian, you want to say something?
Hi. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I guess I'm mostly here to listen, but I know I have a few clients right now that I think I would like to move to using compost on their sites, and I want to see they're not fully on board with that idea, so I want to find out what's like the most neat looking, easy transition from like, a typical gardening. So I guess that's, yeah.
Okay.
I'll just say, Jillian, I have a similar question. I work for a landscaping company.
Yeah.
In like the Boston area. I know some of our clients are interested in a more organic approach, but how do I facilitate that? When
Exactly.
they want, their guests to come over to see this beautifully manicured backyard, like, how do we transition into that?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I found the microscope and now I'm really going to pay attention. Okay, there it is. It's $343 on Amazon, but I just ordered it from the actual maker, Omax, and they're having a sale. I think it's like $40 off or something. I do have, if you are interested, you can contact me and I'll just put my contact information in there. In terms, I have a number of videos where I do demonstrations on how to set up your microscope, what you're looking for, basic training. They're recorded videos that I can give you a link to. So if you want to find me, I'm here. Okay. And there's, of course, Dr. Elaine Ingham is who I studied with, and the Soil Food Web. For a mere $4,000, you can sign up. I did do all of those courses and found them incredibly useful. But if you are doing this for clients and you just want to have a quick peek at the materials that you're buying or want to purchase or you're making, having your own microscope is really, a lot of farmers are now at that stage where they're looking at their own compost that they're making. In fact, I have a video of compost, what it looks like under the microscope from various sources. It's like 8 minutes, and I thought I might show it to you and stop it at any point if you have any questions about what's going on. But I'll do that in a few minutes because we have an hour. So I'm sorry, Jillian, what was your question in terms of trying to sell the idea to clients? Did I hear that correctly?
Oh, yeah, I think me and Dawn kind of had a similar, we both work for clients in the Boston area that have these, like, I have most people I work for just want the manicured garden, but I know a lot of them that I really love are trying to move, like they've always refused to fertilizers, and I'm really want to be able to put like a nice kind of it's hard to say what's the cleanest, most she way I can involve compost so that, right, if someone comes over, they're not like, what is that? And I can be like, oh, there it is. And it's beautiful. So.
So if the easy way anyone can compost is, remember in the static pile where you just have one of those bins that are really easy to use, and just keep throwing stuff in there, throw all your food waste in there, and then just put a bunch of leaves on top, and then water it, and then soil, and then more food waste. And then that is amazing compost. And it's a great thing to show your clients.
Yeah.
It's a great thing to have, because that compost, you lift up the bottom and it's like black gold under there. And you can use it and you can sell that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Ryan was talking about selling compost, and I really think that that's in the profession of a landscape designer, as I was selling compost. If you are a landscaper and you're focusing on any of these, if not selling it, teaching people how to do it, I think it's an invaluable skill. And I'm hoping that a lot of your questions about composting were answered in that. Did everyone see the video or the recordings? So I really think it's the way of the future. And since I started composting, I have not put any other inputs on any of the what I grow, whether it's in the ground, whether it's at a farm, whether it's upstairs where the jungle is taking over. So it's we know it works, and it's so easy and healthy for everybody.
Yes, I have a follow-up question that's again related to like working with clients, in that in the areas that I work in, I know that there are rodent issues and rats and things like that.
Yep.
And our clients, they have the little black boxes around their house, which I have my own thoughts and feelings about, but I think there's also that concern about keeping the rodents out of the compost pile in these areas. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, of how we can talk to our clients about that part of things.
There's going to be rodents. Thank heavens, they have their own job to do. Just don't necessarily like them in the house. And I can see, I mean, those big open windrows, there's rats and crazy stuff happening everywhere. It's nature. And I think we have to embrace as much life as we can. I mean, birds are fine, but you don't have wings, we don't like you. So, I mean, cats are okay, but anyway, so which rodents do we like? The mice are that kind of cute. So I think if we can get our heads around the fact that there will be wildlife out there in various forms, and you might not want to say, come on over and eat here. And that's why those black boxes, the rodents are not getting into my black boxes, because they're plastic and they can't penetrate them. So if you are worried about that, you do want an enclosed structure. Otherwise, you would do, those three windrows, and then everybody comes and goes. You can also avoid meats and those sort of things that will attract predators that those smell as well. And mixing it with, so you might have food waste, but when you're mixing it with leaves and ash from the fireplace and everything else, it's not as appealing as a giant batch of wet green material, which you don't want to put in anyway because it'll turn anaerobic. So everything in moderation, and finding ways to minimize rodents. But if you're thinking about rat poison, all that stuff, I don't really agree. No poison. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay. Laurel, you had a question?
Yeah, in your presentation, when you were showing about the worm bins, and there was one example where they took I believe it was a 55-gallon drum, and it went vertically down into the soil.
Yeah, is that funny?
So is that so that the worms can
Survive.
overwinter outdoors? Okay. And then, I mean, how did they get the compost out of that then? I mean, do they have to just shovel it out, or are they lifting the whole barrel? And how do you separate the worms from the worm castings?
Right. And the other problem with that, yes, it won't freeze at the very bottom, but the composting worms only like to hang out at the top level.
Oh,
So what we do have an outdoor bin. This is year 5, I guess, that's been out there. And I don't know if I mentioned this, it's just a flow through bin. So we get a seedling mat, a 2-by-4 foot seedling mat, and put that on the surface.
okay.
And then we have a probe, so it doesn't, a temperature probe, so it doesn't go below, it doesn't turn on unless it gets below 40 degrees.
Uh-huh.
And so it doesn't use a lot of electricity, and it makes it so that the worms are hanging out at the surface anyway, so they're nice and toasty warm under this blanket of seedling mat. And the probe goes at the bottom so that the bottom castings never get colder than 40 degrees. That seems to be what we found the best method. We have another. Sorry, go ahead.
What zone are you in?
We're in 6A.
6A. Okay.
So, but yeah, we've had, as you know, some cold days, especially lately. We also have an unheated barn, using the word loosely, which we covered in 2-inch thick insulation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we put an ENVI heater, ENVI heater on the wall. And that's been fantastic, keeping that room from freezing.
Mm-hmm.
So very energy efficient as well.
Uh-huh. So it sounds like you can just, to separate the castings from the worms, you can just scrape off or scrape aside that top layer.
The worms are going to be at the top. And so when you have a flow through bin or a stackable bin, it's the stuff at the bottom that's finished, and you keep adding food to the top.
Oh,
So with our flow through bin,
I didn't catch that.
you keep adding the food, and then the worms will migrate up when they're finished going through the worm castings. So if you don't have too many worm castings down below, that's finished compost castings.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Hi, I'm Diana. Nice to meet you all. I am a gardener at a retreat center, and I just started last summer. Previous to that, I was gardening and mostly vegetable farming and working with some animals. So I've kind of seen a few different models of composting and when to use it. But I guess now that I'm working on a new property that's pretty expansive, and I'm waiting for some results from a soil test from about 6 different areas that are kind of like a centerpiece of the property and are highly used for different things. I guess I'm wondering how, when to add compost, for what, sort of generally, how often, at what stage of growth, from seed to if I'm growing annual seeds, and for different plants and trees, there's just like a wide variety that I'm working with, and I'm, going to be growing some vegetables too. But mostly like annually, I will be growing flowers and a few vegetables, and then I'm maintaining a lot of like all of the growth on the property. That's like the specific gardens with shrubs and trees and things. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, are there some tips and general rules of thumb? Obviously the soil test will give me a lot more information, but that's like one area. So I'm just like, kind of like wrap my head around like an annual or a biannual or whatever it is, like maintenance of feeding the soil. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do, and I'm trying to remember what I talked about in the video on worm compost. So I would treat compost different from worm castings. Compost in the spring, I like to put down on a bed that I'm going to be growing food, 2 inches on the surface with good quality compost. Hopefully I have some material there from the year before that I haven't cleaned up that I will throw on top as a type of mulch. And if it was for worm castings, and I don't know if I mentioned this, the use for that, because it's so dense, full of beneficial microbes and expensive, because it takes a lot to make good worm compost. But with those castings, I add about 10% to the seed starting mix, so that those seeds have all those microbes around the minute it germinates. The other, which I think is the most important time to put down worm or to add worm castings, is transplant stage. So you take your transplant, you put it in the hole, and you add a little handful of the worm castings. All of those microbes are now around the roots. They form that symbiotic relationship. As the roots develop, those worm castings, all those microbes will multiply and move with the roots. So that continues. And then because you're going to be removing all of those nutrients by harvesting, I will then add a compost tea during the growing season. So adding plant available nutrients to the leaves and around the roots. And you want to make sure it's certified organic, which is hard to find, so that it's been used. There's no pathogens, especially if you're spraying leaves of lettuce or something like that. Then you'd be careful on how you apply the compost tea.
Mm-hmm.
So is that helpful? I don't know if
Yeah, and like generally for perennial, for shrubs and trees, what would be your sort of, sorry?
Never clean up the leaves, because that's the main food source for them. So training ourselves to keep the leaf litter there. And then I generally, unless I'm having issues, I will not add anything to the trees or the shrubs. I do have a few peach trees that I will do compost tea spray on. Also apple, it gets rid of botrytis and black spot. But generally, in a garden situation where I have, there's a dwarf hawthorn and I've got the sangu kaku Japanese maple there, I don't bother with anything. I just make sure that I never disturb the soil around it, including the leaves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you would recommend worm castings that you were speaking of earlier at the seed starting and the transplant stage instead of compost? Like, because I have I went to get the Vermont Compost Company's potting soil, and I'm going to try to get their Compost Plus as for the transplant stage, because I just know they have high quality products. But would you think that it would be sufficient, or would you really recommend, like, maybe not like now, but like just for me to really think about trying to get worm castings specifically, or generating them at
Yeah, I think we should all do worm composting. We should all do our own. So that's just because, all these years, that is what I found to be the most effective. But if you have compost that's good quality, maybe just add a little more. And you're adding a top dressing and maybe putting it around the roots, great. As long as there's enough soil structure there so that the plant has the capability of growing and having that vigor, yeah, I think that's good.
Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Any other questions?
Monique, can I ask you something?
I guess so, since we're here. Go ahead.
A couple things. One is, when I think of compost, obviously I've kind of played with compost and just not moving material off my own private property, just more of a static pile or sometimes turning it. And then when I've worked, for traditional landscapers, we get compost either in bulk or in something like, I think it's Lobster. I'm trying to think of the brand, but it would be bagged compost. And generally you could tell that it had a lot of organic material and you think of it as compost. But because it was in a plastic bag, would that have suffocated? I mean, do you think that would have all activity ended up stopping as far as bacteria and fungi and such as
Bacteria
that?
would be fine.
Pardon?
The bacteria will be fine.
The bacteria
Fungi,
would be fine.
yeah. When I do look at bagged compost, it certainly doesn't have the life and the aggregate structure and the fungal mixed in like I would if I were just, getting it off my own property. But what are we going to do? We have to transport this stuff and we have to
Right.
get it to clients and we have to get it to our, if we're not producing our own. So I think high quality, like as we were talking about, the Vermont or coast of Maine, those products, Vermont, what is it? Vermont compost, that product in Vermont. Anyone remember? Anyway, that you can get high quality compost. And so what you won't get is the predators, the amoeba and the nematodes and things like that. They're not going to survive a sealed plastic bag.
Could you inoculate that with a worm, worm castings? I mean,
Yeah, you can certainly do that. The only thing about worm castings is once you get them, you really want to put them close around plants as soon as possible. So, I mean, they'll do fine, but if you put them in some compost and it just sits there, they're not going to have necessarily the food source that you want. And they won't be able to have that symbiotic relationship with the plants. So you really want to think about incorporating whatever materials you're getting around the plants, around the roots of your plants. And that's why I never just take worm castings and just spread it on a field or on a row, because it's a bit of a waste. A lot of those microbes that are, predatory, they're not really going to survive as well as when you are in an environment where plants are growing and there's roots sustaining life.
do you use the worm castings for compost tea?
I do. That's the only thing I use. Well, I add those amendments, but that's what I put in just because of the high amount of microbes in that compost, in the castings. But
When I see, for instance, your mentor there, when I see videos by her and I see, I'm just reading or viewing videos, whatever I can, and seeing the range of compost tea being described, it seems like they add worm castings and then possibly some other supplements like kelp, or I don't know whether it acts as food. It seems kind of like a witch's brew sort of thing to me. I'm just thinking, okay, what is success, and how can you monitor it to have a repeatable formula,
right.
and to be able to make it in.
I use the same formula every time.
You
Because
use the same.
and that recipe is in those recordings.
Okay.
So it's, for example, you're doing a 50-gallon brew. It's 10 pounds of worm castings. It's, I think, a cup of liquid kelp. And I've tried different ingredients and different amounts, but that amount of kelp and then a quarter cup of fish hydrolysate with a little bit of humic acid as a binder. Those three, it's, again, I've been doing this for 10, maybe 15 years. Those three ingredients seem to be giving me the best balance.
Okay.
And that you don't necessarily have, if you don't have a brewer and you don't want to invest in all of that, you can just take worm castings, put them in non-chlorinated water, stir them up, those microbes are being released, and then you do an extract rather than a compost tea. Much easier. You certainly won't get that multiplication because you're not giving them a food source, you're not giving them a chance to be in that environment and multiply. But what you are doing is adding to water that you're going to be using to irrigate anyway, you're adding microbes. So that's beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Well, I have another one, but I don't want to hog. So that was really interesting what you just said about worm castings really should be incorporated right around plant roots, right away to be effective. But so I'm trying to understand why it's okay then just to broadcast compost.
Well, look at the price difference.
Well, true.
I mean, you can certainly do that with worm castings, but I think that's a bit of a waste of money.
Okay. But
Those
like the microbes in the compost, don't they want to be next to plant roots as soon as possible too?
Yes, but the difference is that that you don't have that amount.
Okay.
So, and you don't have that whole trophic, all the trophic levels. You'll have bacteria, hopefully some fungi, but you're not going to have the amoebas running around and the flagellates and the microarthropods and the nematodes. All of that, that's a real soil food web, which you can acquire if you leave the soil alone undisturbed and you grow perennials or something like that eventually, and then it turns into a succession planting into getting more into the forest area. Then all of those microbes will have a chance to hang out. But the way we garden, and especially when we're growing food, we're messing around with that soil all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So the less we're disturbing it, the more this soil food web can carry on.
Mm-hmm.
So because if you've got compost and you've done the thermophilic method, all of those microbes have been killed except for the bacteria. So then you have to wait for up to a year for those microbes to come back into that compost. So again, it's a waiting period. And the compost that we're buying generally is usually not aged as long as we want it to. There's not the microbes around to populate it. And so it's less expensive, and think about it sort of in between soil and worm castings. It's sort of in the middle there.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts on biochar?
Oh, that's my test trial this year.
Oh.
We're going to be doing 2 plots, one with biochar. We're going to be adding the same amendments to both in terms of compost and worm castings. And my question is, will the biochar really be a nice habitat for the microbes? So I'm going to be doing a lot of microscopy of the soils to compare the microbe population in both.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that, from my understanding, that's really the best use of the biochar, having all of those places or habitats for microbes to live. Mm-hmm. And how does that affect the microbe population? That's my question.
So
I will report back.
Next year. Okay.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
So I have that video. How are we doing for time? 5:38. So I'm going to play the video, and there are different composters, people doing different types of composting. I'll stop it after each section and see if you have any questions about how people are doing it. All right, how's that sound? Okay, so I'm going to share this screen. Okay, we're going to start with the biggest. Ready? Can everyone see this?
We're here at Earth Care Farm. We've been making compost for a little over 40 years. And
we can all see and hear that? Yep, okay.
So fortunate to be the 2nd generation compost farmer here. Learned the tricks of the trade from my dad. And we have a large diversity of ingredients that we start our compost with, from bedding and manure and leaves, wood chips, coffee grounds, a lot of fish scraps and shellfish, and some food scraps as well. We have a longer process. It takes us about a year to make a finished batch of compost, and then we do screen it to a half-inch screen, half-inch or less. And at the end, we have this black, beautiful, life-filled goodness to spread onto your gardens and fields.
100 times magnification. This is compost from Earth Care Farms. You can see it's very full, but what I am seeing is not the fungal. Loads of bacteria, very diverse. Aggregates throughout, so nice, mature. No predators that I could find, but active and alive. So it is definitely bacterial dominant, but nice assortment of various types of bacteria.
The scale I'm able to achieve here by having this equipment, I'm able to process hundreds of tons of material a day, turn that into a rich living soil. My impact is so much more. So don't be intimidated by the equipment. That's something you can figure out. It's not hard, and it's really empowering.
I don't know if we want to stop on there. Let's just go to.
Okay, my name is.
Okay. So I love this comparison. So there is no like set way to do composting. There are so many different scales. So Domingo has a business where he goes around door to door and picks up food scraps. And then he will go and he gets leaves dropped off there and wood chips, and he mixes the whole thing in a really cool way. So my question, do you have any questions about how Earth Care Farms in Rhode Island does it compared to a smaller scale? I mean, that is huge. They've been doing it for 40 years. But you can see, I guess, because they are turning it quite regularly and then they screen it, at whatever their inputs are, you're just not seeing the fungal in there. It can compare that to the castings or the compost you're going to see that Domingo makes. So should I keep going? Yep. Okay, here's Domingo.
Domingo Medina. I'm the founder and director of operation of Peels and Wheels Composting. It's basically a composting service. We pick up food scraps that the residents and household produce. Also schools and small businesses and restaurants around New Haven. We collect them through a system of bikes and trailers, and we bring it here to gather New Haven, to the former New Haven Farms at the back, the parking lot of Phoenix Press, that has allowed us to use this space for farming and also for producing compost under the concept of community composting. I work with what's called aerated static pile system. These are in vessel. And what it means is that we supply oxygen, air, through a systems of PVC pipes in the back of the system. We collect energy from the sun with solar panels. We store that energy in batteries. And then we have an inverter that will change the DC voltage to AC that runs a blower that allows to push air into the chambers. These systems are great for urban settings because they are enclosed. Once it's in, we have the proper recipe, we have the proper moisture, and the rest is pushing it into the chambers. In a matter of 30 days, we take this material out and we put new material in. This is sifted compost. So this is the end product that we really like, and something that we're learning, not only the properties of this compost,
take a look
but
at all
the soil
that
biology that we might be producing. Are we producing the soil biology that we need to be able to guarantee all the beneficial properties of compost?
Look at all those
fungal. The holding capacity of nutrients and the cycling property
Great
of the soil
aggregates
biology
here.
in the soil food
That's a
web of your
testate
compost.
amoeba right there.
Those are, I think, the major benefits
We found a
that compost can
nematode.
do for your soil.
What we do is because of the fact that we grow the microgreens, and so we have so much of this excess soil that we dump every week. So we basically are dumping about 3,000 flats a week. Most of our customers are either landscape gardeners or companies that are building gardens for homeowners and are using this in mostly raised beds because it is so rich in organics and it is certified organic. So the homeowners want that now. But you can see this is probably a year old, and it's, look how rich it is. You can see how rich it is and how dark it is. I mean, see the difference between the sun hitting it.
This is 100 times magnification, finished compost from Gilberti's. See those small rods? Those are fungal hyphae, and I'm seeing excellent fungal throughout this drop. A lot of organic matter still to be decomposed, and no predators that I can tell. And look at that beautiful piece. Let me just zoom in. That's 100. This is 400 times magnification. Nice aggregate structure there. Sandy, you can see those glass bits. That is.
Now I have a different theory here. You see what I thought was glass? The more I looked at it, it's very, very thin. And my concern is because he is bringing in this soil with the perlite and all of these other, I'm worried it's a plastic. And so I've got to talk to him about it, but it's certified organic, but still that doesn't look like glass to me the more I'm looking at it. So see what you think.
So there's nice septa along that fungal hyphae there, partitions between the cells. And in the background, you can see good diversity of bacteria. You have some rods and some cocci, round cocci.
You see there's, you can also see there's a lot more space between the bacteria, but these shards, I don't know. I'm going to have to investigate that. Does anyone else have an opinion about that? Okay, so let's continue on. This next one is a farm, an organic farm.
Cocci, round cocci.
They have 3/4 of an acre.
We operate Ossawaga Farm in Putnam, Connecticut, and we grow a diverse range of organic vegetables. And what else?
We're no-till. This is our 4th season.
Our practice is emphasize the soil health. So we try to really think about the living ecology in the soil, whatever we do.
So we're doing thermophilic composting. We measure out the ingredients with 5-gallon buckets, and we'll do a 30 or a 40 bucket pile. Pretty much every week we've been doing it. So we've got several piles here that are in different stages. One we just made yesterday, this one here. So you can see it's nice and green and fresh. After a few days, it's gonna not be green anymore. And we'll turn these twice, get them up to 130 degrees or more. And that one is still coming up. I think it's just above 120 right now. So we'll probably hit 130 tomorrow.
So I'm just going to stop there and mention, and I'm sure that you all know this already, but the practical guide, if you are doing proper thermophilic, and you might need to know this for, I don't know, tests or whatever, is you want to have it 131 degrees for a minimum of 15 days, and you want to turn the pile 5 times. And that to make sure you get rid of all the pathogens and weed seeds. So that's the standard. So they're doing their own composting. They're only putting vegetative inputs in here. So I think that's fine, but just so you know the standards. So 131 degrees, 15 days, turn it 5 times.
And then once it hits that temperature, we let it sit for 3 days or 2 days or 1 day, depending on how hot it got. just to make sure that we've cooked out any pathogens and weed seeds. And then we'll flip it, make sure that we put another part of it into that hot center, and we'll do that twice so that every part of the pile cooks. And then we'll monitor the temperature, turn it if we need to, but just let it come down. And once it's come down, we've got a pile like this, which is something that we would use in the field. And rather than that deep compost application, this is more of an inoculant. So if you smell this, it smells really sweet. There's a lot of biological activity. If you look at it under a microscope, which we do, you can see the bacteria, the protozoa, the fungi, the nematodes, all the good guys.
100 times magnification. This is from Asawaka Farm, a compost pile that's just finished. You see it is really teeming with fungi, various types of fungi, which is really good to see. Some like fungal spores in the center there, circles. Let's zoom in on this piece here.
I like the diversity of fungi as well.
400 times.
Different thicknesses, different
See
shades.
how diverse all of this fungi attached to this aggregate here. So this would make excellent amendment to any soil, especially if you're planting more perennials that need a higher fungal ratio to bacteria. This would do really well.
And this is cooling down now. It's been flipped a couple of times, but it smells great. We haven't looked at it under the scope yet, but
yeah,
it certainly doesn't smell anaerobic or anything.
We're looking at 100 times magnification. Here's a bacterial feeding nematode I found in some compost at Asawaka that was not quite done with vegetarian inputs only. So we're finding that one predator in this aerobic pile,
So
which
that's
is
a
great
test data
and
meal?
interesting because the pile is not yet finished and the temperature might have killed it, but apparently not. We're also seeing some beautiful fungal hyphae throughout this sample. You'll notice that the aggregate structure is not as dense as the earlier version where we had more mature compost. But the bacteria should come together and form these aggregates as it stabilizes. There are diverse types of bacteria throughout. And again, fungi is diverse and numerous.
Okay, so that's the end of that story. So I hope you found that interesting in terms of different types of compost. Which is the nicest? Well, I would say Domingo has the most fungal definitely in there. But I did also like the look of the farm thermophilic that we just looked at. So there are different ways to skin a cat, different ways to make compost. I'm wondering if anyone has questions about how they might want to start or what they're planning.
I guess I have a question. You said once it gets up to temperature, you want to keep it for 15 days and like maybe turn it every 5 days. But what if that schedule was every 7 days? Like how long after, like, will it just nuke everything if it's a couple days longer? I don't know.
Right. The reason you're turning it is that inside of that pile, so you got the thing, that's reached that temperature, but the outside walls that are exposed to the air have not. So you have cooked this section really well, but now you want to make sure that that section goes to the outside and the outside goes to the inside. Mostly, especially for Alex and Yoko, they're concerned about weed seeds. So they're putting everything in there. They want to make sure they reach that temperature so they kill all the weed seeds. A beautiful example of why thermophilic is the answer if you're doing it on a scale like that. My little static pile is not reaching 130 degrees. And even if it was, I'm not turning it. So it's a different animal. But with the thermophilic, just imagine taking that inside, putting it in the outside, taking the outside, putting it in the inside. And to make sure you get all these sides in the center, that's why they ask you to turn it those 5 times.
Okay, but there's no like how long? What if it stayed like that for a long time? Is there an overcook? No.
Well, no, I think it'll cool down.
Okay.
Because it's gone through the process enough. And in fact, at the end of the 5th turn, it'll start to cool down and then you let it sit. So the only thing I noticed about that last pile that they showed us, and in fact, I went back in the summer and looked at it under the microscope, it was more sparse. And I think they're not adding enough water. Water is one of those things that you really underestimate how much is needed when you are composting. Mm-hmm. So you do need water and oxygen. So more than you might think. So when you have even your static pile, add some water, a bucket of water, or if you have your hose it down and seal. That will help with the decomposition. It's just like, think of them as living organisms. Oh, guess what? They are. They need water. And if it dries out, it's not going to be as healthy. So.
I have one other question. I mean, in the past, my composting efforts have not been particularly scientific. And you talk about getting a ratio of 25:1 carbon to nitrogen, and then you had those charts with the different carbon content of different items. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, I mean, should I really be like calculating it all out? Or like, how much attention do you pay to, oh, cardboard has a whole lot of carbon in it, and I don't know what was less, like leaves are less.
And it's interesting, like wood ash has really high nitrogen, more than I thought. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So I think just having that chart handy, so or in your mind, and I think you can just Google that, say, well, what are the carbon nitrogen ratios of inputs for composting? It's just good to know, because I still get surprised. I think brown coffee grounds, well, they're really high in nitrogen. And I would look at pardon?
And they were on the green list, which surprised me.
I know, me too. And so if you're looking at your pile going, that's a sloppy mess, what am I going to add? Well, leaves, wood chips actually would really get the job done, because that's 400:1. So, and what have I got handy? Well, I have cardboard. What is the ratio? So it's just a reference.
Okay.
But it's basically, if it's too high carbon, it's going to take forever to decompose. And if it's too high nitrogen, it's going to be a stinky mess. Mm-hmm. So that balance, like everything in life, right? We have to find that balance.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. Any last questions? We have 3 whole minutes left.
I might have a very silly question, but I guess it's back to also my non-scientific compost pile that I used personally a couple of years ago. This seems like a dumb question, but who knows? I just kind of threw everything into our bin, and then I noticed for like a month, I just got so many mushrooms growing out of it, and I assumed that was a good thing. Is there any like very, very clear sign, like, oh, look at that? Like, that seemed like a good thing.
I think
right? It was all
living
wild. Yeah. Okay. There's not like a bad one. I don't know. I would assume that was good.
I wouldn't necessarily eat the mushrooms.
No.
But I think that's a good sign. Yeah, I think that's and they'll need oxygen to survive. So you should have aerobic conditions in there.
Good.
I think that's great.
Good. I was hoping that was the proof that it worked, because I was like, oh my God, look, it worked. But
Cool. Okay, so are we good? Are you all enjoying the course? Is it interesting?
Yes.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, you've got my number. If you have any questions, feel free to contact, or you don't have my number, but you have my email. Any questions at all, I'm here to help and answer them. And so thrilled to see you all here, and enjoy all the learning that there is in this opportunity. All right, are we good?
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming this evening.
Time.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone.